Pre-registered coordinates. Drone surveillance. No escape route. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The Russian coastal defense battery had one job: keep Ukrainian naval assets, surface drones, torpedoes, anything that floated or skimmed the waterline, away from the occupied coastline west of the Kerch Strait. The battery was the shield. The reason Russian logistics vessels could move through those waters without watching the horizon for incoming fire. Russian planners had spent months hardening the position. They rotated launcher trucks on rehearsed schedules. They ran generators only during pre-approved windows. They buried the command post under 12 meters of compacted earth and reinforced concrete. They planted the entire installation inside a camouflaged tree line on elevated ground above the Black Sea coast, where the sea cliffs masked low-altitude approaches from the water. The Russians believed the position was untrackable. They were wrong about nearly everything. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Tonight, we're breaking down one of the most precisely planned drone strikes of the entire Black Sea campaign. A strike that didn't just destroy a missile battery. It destroyed the idea that certain targets were simply beyond reach. Here's what you need to understand before we go any further. This was not a lucky hit. Not a missile fired toward an occupied coastline and hoped for the best. What Ukrainian intelligence, drone operators, and planners pulled off in the hours surrounding this strike required months of patient, methodical reconnaissance. The kind that never appears in headlines, never generates footage, never trends anywhere. Quiet work, invisible work, and it made the entire operation possible. By the time the first drone crossed the coastline, the Ukrainian strike cell already knew the precise grid coordinates of every launcher truck in the battery. They knew which generator ran on what cycle. They knew the radar crew's rotation schedule. They had cataloged 17 separate heat signatures from satellite thermal imaging, cross-referenced against commercial satellite passes and signals intelligence intercepts, and built a three-dimensional model of the target area down to the individual tree cover above each launcher position. They knew the battery better than the Russian technicians maintaining it. The strike window opened at a specific moment, a rotation gap. 31 minutes when the radar system entered its cooldown cycle, when the command post crew had just changed shift and incoming personnel were still running their startup checklist, when coastal fog wrapped the tree line above the cliffs and degraded the optical tracking capability of Russian close-in defense systems ringing the perimeter. 31 minutes. That was the window Ukrainian planners had been waiting for, and they filled it completely. Which weapon was deadlier in this strike? A. Long-range attack drones. B. Coordinated artillery. C. Electronic jamming support. Drop your answer in the comments. We'll break down the numbers before this video ends. The Coastal Defense Battery was not a small installation. This was a serious, layered, professionally operated military asset. At its core sat multiple truck-mounted launcher systems, each capable of carrying anti-ship missiles with ranges exceeding 300 kilometers. Not short-range point defense weapons, strategic assets. The kind that force an entire naval force to plan every movement around their threat envelope. Supporting those launchers was a dedicated fire control radar, a separate acquisition radar positioned on the cliff edge for maximum sea surface coverage, a signals intelligence package monitoring Ukrainian naval drone frequencies, and a hardened command and communications shelter linked directly to Russian Black Sea Fleet headquarters. The installation was ringed by a perimeter defense element. Infantry positions, at least 2 mobile air defense systems for close-in protection, and a network of optical cameras covering the landward approaches. On paper, the position was nearly impregnable to conventional attack. Artillery was too inaccurate at range and would have revealed Ukrainian targeting data before the strike landed. A cruise missile approach from the sea would have triggered the acquisition radar the moment it crossed the horizon. A direct airstrike was out of the question given Russian air defense density in the region. But Ukrainian planners had identified something the Russians hadn't fully protected against: the inland vector. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes of this story eliminates an entire coastal defense sector. The foundational assumption the entire battery's defensive posture was built on: threats would come from the sea. Everything faced west and south. Every radar pointed toward the water. Every close-in defense system was oriented for sea-skimming missiles and naval drone approaches. The tree line above the cliffs was chosen precisely because it provided cover against that threat axis. It provided almost no protection against a threat coming from inland. Ukrainian drone operators had spent weeks mapping the flight corridors. The approach route they settled on threaded through a series of radar shadows, valleys and ridgelines that blocked Russian ground-based radar coverage. then climbed to attack altitude only in the final 3 kilometers, emerging from inland terrain directly above the battery's unprotected rear arc. The drones would arrive not from the sea, not from the sky, but from the land. From the direction the Russians had written off as safe. The strike package that launched that evening consisted of long-range attack drones. Ukrainian-manufactured systems built specifically for this category of operation, not commercial quadcopters, not improvised FPV platforms. Purpose-built strike systems with ranges exceeding 400 kilometers, carrying shaped charge warheads optimized for hardened military targets. Each drone weighed under 75 kilograms. Each carried a warhead capable of defeating the armor of a wheeled vehicle or penetrating the roof of a command shelter. The Ukrainian drone cell was small. 6 operators total, 3 primary, 3 backup. They had trained on this specific target profile for weeks using a replica set of coordinates built from satellite imagery. They had run the flight path simulation dozens of times. Every turn, every altitude change, every terrain feature along the inland corridor. When the 31-minute window opened, the launch sequence began. The first drone went airborne from a concealed launch position well beyond Russian artillery range. Then the second. Then a third, fourth, fifth, sixth. The swarm launched on a staggered sequence, not simultaneously, but spread across 8 minutes, to ensure that even if Russian radar detected the trailing elements, the lead elements would already be in final approach range before any intercept could be coordinated. The Russian radar crew in the cooldown cycle never saw them coming. How many launcher vehicles did Ukraine destroy in this strike? A-4, B-7, C-11. Answer coming before this video ends. The lead drone crossed into the final approach corridor at low altitude, following a dry riverbed that ran parallel to the coastal cliffs for its last 6 kilometers of flight. The Ukrainian operators watching the data feed saw terrain features matching their preloaded map exactly. The flight was precisely on profile. 3 kilometers out, the drone climbed. And the battery appeared in the targeting feed exactly where Ukrainian intelligence had said it would be. The first vehicle in the crosshairs was a launcher truck, positioned at the northeastern corner of the battery, partially concealed under camouflage netting visible from above as a rectangular shadow against the tree line. Thermal imaging showed engine heat. The truck had been running its climate control system for the crew cab. That generator heat signature, the same one Ukrainian signals intelligence had been tracking for months, was glowing on the targeting display like a beacon. The operator locked the targeting solution. The first drone went terminal. Impact. The warhead detonated against the roof of the launcher cab. The overpressure wave shredded the vehicle's internal electronics. The missile tubes on the launch rail buckled and collapsed. Secondary detonation. Not of the missiles themselves, not immediately, but of the fuel tank, through a column of fire 30 meters into the night air. The Russian perimeter sentries saw it first. The battery command post registered the explosion on its internal alert system at the same moment. Personnel began responding, exactly the kind of movement Ukrainian planners had anticipated. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Real tactics, real consequences. EastAlert. Because what came next was designed around that response. The second and third drones arrived 11 seconds after the first impact. They weren't aimed at launcher trucks. They were aimed at the response. Ukrainian planners had studied Russian standard operating procedures for base alert responses. The protocols dictating where personnel move, which positions they take, which shelters they run for in the first 60 seconds after an alarm. Those protocols were written years earlier for a different threat environment, designed to get crew members to hardened positions and onto air defense systems as quickly as possible. Those hardened positions and air defense systems were now aim points. The second drone struck the command shelter. The shaped charge penetrated the reinforced roof and detonated inside. Communications equipment destroyed. The link to Black Sea Fleet headquarters went silent. The third drone struck the mobile air defense vehicle that had repositioned to its alert station on the western perimeter, putting it squarely in the open, gun pointed toward the sea, completely exposed on its landward flank. The Russian perimeter defense was now fragmented. The command element was gone. The primary air defense asset was burning, and 5 more drones were still inbound. This is where things got complicated, and where the Ukrainian strike cell showed exactly why preparation beats improvisation. The fourth drone experienced a targeting system malfunction on final approach. The operator's display showed degraded resolution at the critical lock-on phase. Ukrainian operators later determined that Russian electronic warfare assets in the area had started emitting jamming signals in the frequency band used by the drone's terminal guidance system. Not targeted jamming, a pre-programmed EW response to the alert, but enough to degrade the targeting feed. The operator had 12 seconds to make a decision. He switched to backup guidance mode, a semi-autonomous terrain matching system that didn't rely on the jammed frequency. The drone's flight path adjusted. Resolution dropped, but the target stayed in frame. He fired the terminal attack command manually. The fourth drone struck the acquisition radar antenna array on the cliff edge. The radar went offline. The battery's sea surveillance capability was completely destroyed. 12 seconds. One decision. One backup system. The entire strike depended on that moment and that operator's training. If you believe tactics win wars, not equipment, not budgets, not headcounts, but tactics, type EastAlert in the comments. The fifth and sixth drones arrived in the final 2 minutes of the strike window. By that point, the battery perimeter was in complete disarray. No coherent communications, no air defense capability, no functioning radar. The close-in optical cameras were still operational, but without a command node to route their feeds, the imagery was going to screens in a burning shelter. The fifth drone struck the second launcher truck, on the southwestern end of the battery, partially sheltered by the tree line but exposed from above. Direct hit on the missile storage rack. The warheads on the loaded anti-ship missiles didn't fully cook off. Safety systems prevented sympathetic detonation, but the launcher mechanism was destroyed and the missiles rendered permanently inoperable. A 300-kilometer range anti-ship missile system reduced to scrap metal. The sixth drone was allocated for battle damage assessment overflight, then repurposed in the final minutes for a secondary strike on the battery's fuel storage point. A set of tanker vehicles parked at the tree line's northern edge that had appeared on pre-strike imagery but hadn't been listed as a primary target. When the sixth drone's warhead struck the lead tanker vehicle, the resulting fire spread to the second tanker within 40 seconds. The fuel fire burned for 6 hours. Satellite imagery analysis confirmed what the drone operator's targeting feeds had already shown. The battery was destroyed. Not damaged. Not degraded. Destroyed. What would NATO have done differently with this strike? Would a manned aircraft approach have achieved better results? Or would Russian air defense have made that impossible? Comment your analysis below. 7 launcher vehicles hit. 4 destroyed outright. 3 damaged beyond field repair. The command shelter eliminated. The fire control radar offline. The acquisition radar destroyed. The fuel storage burning. The close-in air defense vehicle destroyed. The communications link to fleet headquarters severed. Total strike duration from first impact to last drone exiting the target area, 22 minutes. Ukrainian sources estimate the total material value of destroyed equipment at over $180 million US. Launcher vehicles, missile loads, radar systems, command shelter equipment, support vehicles. $180 million. Destroyed in 22 minutes by 6 operators working a 31-minute window that Russian planners didn't even know existed. Combat footage verification from drone targeting feeds released by Ukrainian military sources shows the sequential strike impacts with remarkable clarity. The tree line positions, vehicle outlines under camouflage netting, thermal signatures of running equipment, all exactly where Ukrainian intelligence had placed them on the target map. Strike planning and execution matched to within meters. That isn't luck. That's months of systematic reconnaissance, patient intelligence work, and operators who had run this flight path in simulation until they could execute it in their sleep. Ukrainian General Staff reports confirmed the battery's operational status as destroyed in the follow-up damage assessment. Russian forces did not attempt to rebuild the position at the same site. The coastal defense gap created by the battery's elimination persisted for weeks before Russian forces could reposition replacement systems from other sectors. And those repositioned systems were operating in degraded status, without the full suite of supporting radar equipment the destroyed battery had fielded. The stretch of occupied coastline the battery had been protecting was, for a significant period, effectively unshielded. Ukrainian naval drone operations in the Black Sea intensified during that window. OSINT investigations tracked increased Ukrainian surface drone activity in the coastal waters the destroyed battery had previously covered. Russian logistics vessels adjusted their routing. The strategic impact of a single 22-minute drone strike rippled outward across weeks of subsequent operations. Intercepted Russian communications. Fragments published by Ukrainian intelligence described the battery's destruction as a catastrophic intelligence failure. Russian officers expressed disbelief that the position had been found, let alone struck. The inland approach vector was specifically referenced as something Russian planners had not modeled as a viable attack axis. That miscalculation, the assumption that the sea was the threat and the land was safe, is what happens when defense planning is built around yesterday's threat instead of tomorrow's capability. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight, real tactics, real consequences. EastAlert. Now, for the answer to the tactical quiz from earlier. How many launcher vehicles did Ukraine destroy in this strike? The answer is B7 vehicles hit, with 4 destroyed outright and 3 damaged beyond field repair. The breakdown matters. 4 primary launcher trucks carrying anti-ship missile loads were assessed as destroyed, meaning the launcher mechanism and loaded missiles were rendered permanently non-functional. 3 additional vehicles, including support and radar-linked trucks, were damaged beyond what field maintenance teams could address without depot-level repair. The total operational output of the battery was reduced to 0. That is the metric that matters in battle damage assessment. Not how many explosions occurred, but how many of the system's core functions were eliminated. Every single function of this battery – radar, command, launch capability, communications, fuel supply – was either destroyed or critically degraded in 22 minutes. The tactical lesson here isn't complicated. A defensive position is only as strong as the threat model it was built to defend against. The Russian battery commanders built a solid defense against the threats they anticipated. Sea-launched missiles, naval drones skimming the waterline, cruise missiles on western approaches. They did not build a defense against Ukrainian operators who had spent months finding the one angle the defense couldn't cover: the inland approach, the unguarded rear arc, the assumption that land meant safety. That assumption cost them $180 million in equipment and the strategic protection of an entire coastal sector. Was the Russian decision to orient all radar and defense assets toward the sea the right tactical choice? Or did it represent a failure to account for evolving Ukrainian strike capabilities? Could the battery crew have detected the drone swarm earlier if their electronic warfare systems had been better integrated with the perimeter defense? And if you had been commanding the Ukrainian strike cell that night, with a 31-minute window, 6 drones, and 6 operators, what would you have done differently? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every response. Will Ukraine develop even longer-range inland approach strike packages targeting Russian air defense networks further from the front? Comment why yes or no, and tell us which Russian system you think gets hit next. Subscribe to EastAlert. We break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Preparation defeats improvisation. The most important military operations aren't the ones you see. They're the ones you only understand after someone explains exactly what happened and why. The coastline is quieter now. The tree line where the battery sat is scarred earth and burned metal. The launcher tubes that once covered 300 kilometers of Black Sea waters are twisted wreckage. Modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy and rewards the side that does the hardest, most patient, most invisible work before the first drone ever leaves the ground. Stay vigilant.